David Sciplin from Caldwell Banker, and today we're with Jim Domingo from Property ID.
Hello, everyone.
So I want to thank you for being here. So the reason I called Jim is because there are many reports that are required that buyers get and that sellers get. And one of those is called a Natural Hazards Disclosure Report. And we basically say it's an NHD. So tell us about that with yourself and your company, and what is that report?
So I've been with the company for about 4 years. I had no idea what this industry was about. I did not know what a natural hazard disclosure was. So the natural hazard disclosure came about because it became legally required about 1998 due to the various hazards that were happening at the time, possibly the Oakland Hills. And so that came in as an emergency requirement. The state of California thus far is the only state that legally requires it, apart from the TDS. Although the other states have one, it is not legally required. The natural hazard disclosure identifies all the various environmental hazards of the land of the property, not the structure, but the land. So we can go into that afterwards.
Sure. So when I started in this business, there were maybe 3 or 4 companies that were doing natural hazard disclosure reports. Now I don't know how many companies actually provide them. What's changed in the industry that so many other companies can actually provide those kind of reports?
So I'm familiar with about 53.
Okay. I haven't seen that many, but
So there's a good majority that they have an online presence. The major parts are associated or affiliated with another company, be it a title or an insurance, home warranty, or even part of a brokerage. The thing is that the natural hazard disclosure industry is not regulated. You can actually establish one yourself.
Well, okay. I don't know if I'm going to do that, though.
but it is that way. And because it is unregulated, anyone basically can create their own NHD company.
Okay. That kind of makes sense. And that kind of tells us exactly why there's so many companies that are doing it. So I know there's some very special and important sections that are part of that report, and you kind of mentioned some of those. There's a fire. Now we have in our area, there's the fire hazard zones that are added when we had the fires a couple years ago up north mostly.
Right.
Can you talk about some of those reports and the reason behind some of those reports?
So it was because of that. You've got the Paradise Fire, the Butte Fire. California is known for that. Southern California, they have their own fires. And so although it was already reported, it became legally required to be compliant with certain things. The Assembly Bill 38 was passed about 2021, became effective then. And what that required is that when a property is identified as in a fire or a very high fire severity zone, they are required to comply with certain CAL FIRE requirements to harden the home against fire. It could be as creating a perimeter, getting rid of supplemental brush, or hardening the home by using different types of materials on the roofing, etc. So it is a way to protect the home against fire.
Okay. So I also know there's another part of the report that's also not important is in addition to earthquakes, there's earthquake zones and that kind of stuff in there too, but there's the flood zones.
Yes.
And there are codes behind the flood zones, and I know unless someone's interested in going beyond that and checking the FEMA websites and all this kind of stuff, it's so talk a little bit about flood zones.
So our attorney attended a conference, and one of the FEMA reps stated something which really caught her eye, and she incorporated it in our report. And specifically, that FEMA rep said, flood zones do not read flood maps.
Yes.
That's a little hilarious, but fairly true. Although FEMA puts out flood map zones, obviously things can change drastically due to weather and conditions. The focal point that I have expressed and have focused upon are the A and V, risks A and V. So those 2 risks are important for your seller and or your buyer, because if you have or are applying for a federally backed mortgage loan, they have to have flood insurance. They're required to. Then there's also the X and the L. X are special flood zones. L are the ones that have levees. And those are important so that you know that the community or the county is involved in hardening the area against flood. Are you aware that there are community rating systems established by FEMA for flood insurance discounts?
Oh yeah, yeah.
That's right. So depending upon the class that your community is assigned to because of their participation in that CRS, you can get up to 45% discount on your flood insurance.
That's good information for people to know.
Absolutely.
One other thing, as I said, I've been using the reports from Property ID for a long time. I find them very informative, and there are sections in those reports that other companies don't provide. One of them is the zone for endangered species.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that section?
So Property ID is unique in that aspect. We will report any and all environmental impacts of the property, inclusive of which is endangered species. Endangered species encroach, or you may encroach on their habitat, which is a protected area. Because of that, let us assume that your property is abutting that area. Well, although you have enough field, or if you have enough space, you may not be able to build or expand on that property because you'll be encroaching on that endangered species area. In addition to, you have other things such as mines, right? That could be pre-existing, oil wells, loose soil. There are many other factors that are involved in understanding that. As an example, one of my clients was in Mariposa was saying, "Jim, your report is wrong." I said, "Well, why is that?" "Well, the fire marshal said the property is not in a fire zone." I said, "Oh, okay. But yours said it is." I said, "Well, here's a clarification. Our report pertains to the land. There's a small portion on the bottom south or northeast of the property that is part of a fire zone. Your fire marshal was focused on the structure. Yes, in that area, it was in a fire zone. It was not in a fire zone, but the land was." So there's a good clarification there when you're reading it.
Yeah, if they want to build an ADU in the back, which is now very popular in California, especially in our area in Santa Clara County, they may be building on that section.
That's correct.
And then when they actually try to draw the maps with their county building department, that may come up as an issue.
Very true. As like the special flood zone or the flood zones, it does not read maps. You'd be surprised that flying fire embers can travel up to 20 miles.
Oh yeah.
So, especially down south. So it's not unusual. So even though you have fire zones, that property will be affected in one way, shape, or form.
Definitely. So one other thing that's important for people to know is there is a tax section on those reports. Basically, it tells what taxes are assigned to that property, and it breaks it down to a lot of different factors and a lot of different lines.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on some of that for our viewers?
Our report actually has a link to our website where it has a tax estimator. As long as you have its sales price, okay, it's I would say appraised sales price, and you have an estimated closing date, it will and can calculate your expected taxes plus supplemental, and if it has Melrose, it'll include it there. So it's a great way to inform your client what to expect in terms of taxation, and for you as a seller's agent.
Yeah, you mentioned Melrose. So not everybody has that issue, but could you talk about Melrose for a second?
So there are various conditions. Perhaps the community has a maintenance or conditions that require them to maintain the area, or it could be a gated community or a protected area. So they establish a Melrose to maintain those areas. It's a cost to maintain your community, basically, is what it is. And in the area that I'm at or close to, you have River Island, who has that, Edgewood, North Tracy. They all have some measure of Melrose. In fact, the whole city of Manteca basically has Melrose because they require maintenance for the whole town.
Yeah, and what's important for people to know is that is a special tax in addition to your property tax, and you got to make sure you pay it on time. Because the foreclosure notice timeline is different from Melrose than it is from a regular property tax. So that's all I'm going to say about that. So you got to call me for any other information regarding that piece. So Is there anything else you'd like to mention about your company or the reports that you guys provide?
So first of all, because I'm not a realtor or in title or even in lending or an attorney, what I've come to know is that I have observed up to 18 reports now in comparison to property ID. Objectively, I have seen thus far property ID far exceeds the rest of our community. Let's say it that way. So that is my observed opinion. In addition to, there are other things that most people are not aware. Did you know that there is a required bylaw, a renter NHD?
Yep.
Yeah. Most landlords are not aware.
They're not aware of that yet.
Definitely, the renters have no idea, and these are for residential units. And San Jose is known for flooding.
Yeah. And actually, when you mention renters, there's a lot of required reports that buyers normally get that renters also have to have too.
That's correct. And the reason why it was put in place was because of flooding, and it was put in place because the property is owned by the property owner, of course, the landlord. Their coverage does not cover for flood the renter.
Correct.
And that had to be put in some kind of law to protect the renters themselves.
Right.
Okay.
Well,
I do have one other
oh,
thing.
sure. Go ahead.
So we spoke about the community rating system for FEMA for insurance discount for flood. Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with misfortune and calamity provisions?
That I am not.
So there are 58 counties in California. Misfortune and calamity, I believe it was section 170 of the provision. And what it means is that if your property becomes unlivable because of various calamitous conditions, doesn't have to be flood, earthquake, flood, or whatever, and it becomes unlivable, well, you're paying taxes, you're paying insurance, you're paying your mortgage, but you can't live in it. You can actually go to your county's assessor website, download a form to have your property reassessed.
Okay.
And because it is in unlivable conditions, it may be assessed at a lower tax rate. Good point to know.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Now, obviously, there is a caveat to that in that if you already have a low tax rate because you have an older house, it may not be as significant or usable. But if you have a fairly new house, yes, it's advantageous. Now, in addition to, if you have a house that has been experienced that damage, as long as there is at least one wall that is standing, it's not a new build, right? Now it becomes a rehab, basically.
Right.
It is possible through the provisions of Prop 13 that you may still be able to use the previous tax base. Good info.
Okay. So, yeah, so basically for your kind of report, because normally at this point, what I say, well, if anybody wants to get a hold of you, how would they get a hold of you? But since this is a little different situation, if you want to sell your home, I'll make sure you have his report.
So I use the mantra of partnerships. The reason being is because I feel and I see the importance of the realtor in real estate transaction. I asked Sam Iskar, the Northern California Central Valley field guide, and I said, "Hey, Sammy, can you give me some stats?" He said, "Sure." This was mid last year, he gave me these stats. He goes, "Did you know for every home that's sold, it creates about $250,000 worth of revenue?" Okay. In addition to that, it creates about 500 plus jobs. One of them is mine. Okay. Construction, right? And everything else. Also, the state of California is within the top 5 GDPs of the world, 16.9%. Whoa! And lastly, during the COVID shutdown, the real estate industry was considered essential. Realtors basically floated California, creating over $1 billion of revenue for about 15 days in March. That's how important real estate is. You still are needing of your services. People still needed to sell their homes for one way, shape, or form or need. And you made that possible. Virtually even.
Oh, yeah. I still had business during COVID. I was still working. I had clients that still wanted to buy homes, so I was driving them around showing homes.
That's right. And if people would stop and think about that, yes, in the valley here, you have big business, right? Good taxes. Where are the majority of the taxations usually come from on a consistent basis?
Property taxes.
Property tax,
Yep.
real estate taxes. That's where you all are. So thank you.
Thank you.